Our next item, the discussion of Article 4 and 5. So if this board were to indulge me a little bit, we're going to take Article 4 a little out of order. The first item that I'd like to draw the board's attention to is Section 410. And I have passed out some potential revisions to 410. And it's more than just 410, but we're handling it all together because it deals with the same issue, and that is the city's ability to borrow. And you'll see that the majority of the changes are in 410. However, there are some that flow over to 3.9 and 3.10. And we're gonna go through these, but before we go through them in great detail, I wanted to kind of give you a little overview of why these changes are being recommended. And then we've brought several folks here today, some that are here in person, and some that will be joining us virtually, that are going to walk through what we experienced the last time the city went out and did a borrowing during the last bond, and what we learned from that experience with regard to how these restrictions that are in the charter work for and against the city, and then also kind of talking about, with the removal of this language, if it were to be removed, what safeguards are still in place for the taxpayers. So first, out of the last borrowing, we realized that the language that exists in the charter today on this is very antiquated. It doesn't put us on the same playing field as other cities. It actually restricts the flexibility, which can make things potentially more expensive for the taxpayer when the city does borrow. And the language was developed before individuals really relied on professionals to do borrowing. You think about borrowing in the 70s or 80s, it really wasn't the same sophistication level that it is now. So, like I said, the experts that are here are going to talk to you more about the reasons behind these changes, what the current lending environment is and the safeguards that exist, how other cities are dealing with borrowing, so you can get a comparison, and then answer any questions you have. And I encourage you to be free with your questions. With us, we have Dwayne Draper. He's with BMO. He serves as public finance counsel, and he's been in public finance either as an attorney or as an investment banker since 1989. He also was bond counsel for the city on the last bond deal was done. And then we also have Marianne Edmonds and Molly Clark. They are senior managing directors of the Public Resource Advisory Group, actually CRAG. And then afterwards, we're going to have Amy Davis, the city manager, and Junko Brown, the finance director, come up and talk to us about how the existing language could potentially restrict the city with regard to future projects. So with that, maybe having a slight issue. Are we sure we sent them the right link? Because they're saying none of them are logged on, and I know Dwayne was getting on early.
Yeah. If we need to delay that a little bit to get everybody on, we could go back and discuss and kind of clear up all the term limits and the that we had discussed in the last that we were going to bring up again in this one. Would that be okay? Is that okay with everyone? That way we're not delaying it even further.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had that on the agenda, I think is the third item.
Right.
We can, if the board wants to move it up, we can absolutely move it up and take care of that.
And that'll give you guys time to get everybody. So sure everybody read Dennis's letter here that he had kind of done a little poll with some friends and neighbors and what he had come up with. I don't think and I did the same. I don't think that there's any doubt that people might disagree on a 1 year or not a year. 3 or 4 years. But I think for the most part, well, I know everyone I spoke to was all for the three-year terms. And I will say a little bit different than what Dennis found. I also found that the majority of people that I spoke to, all but one actually, was for the voting, keeping the individual commissioners, but voting citywide. I found people really accepted that and really liked that idea. So a little bit different than Dennis's, but so I don't, did any of you have conversations?
Exactly the same as you.
Okay.
I did some polling, very unofficial polling. They did not like going outside. They wanted to stay within their own.
Even knowing that they would still have their own commissioner?
Yep.
Okay.
And I found the same thing. So I think that if you talk to folks that have been in the city a long time, there are a lot of people that believe if you live in one specific part of the city, there's a very slim chance you would ever be selected as a mayor. And potentially if we went to open wide, everybody open voting, that could change. It could give people opportunities from maybe where they feel like they wouldn't be as strong in some of the different areas that they would have the opportunity potentially.
So you're saying that
Sunset, so a lot of people feel like anyone from Sunset Inn would really never have an opportunity to be elected as the mayor of the city. And so maybe just based on only, thinking it's restrictive, and maybe if everybody's thinking for even just their own commissions that everybody's voting, and I know mayor is open voting, but that mayor people would be more used to it for voting. Sunset Beach potentially for voting for the other commissioners. I think maybe it just brings a mentality that we're all voting for the best person for the job for the entire city, not just for their one district. Because obviously everybody is making decisions for the whole city, not just always based on where they live.
that's interesting. That's a real, that's an interesting concept because they're still voting for their commissioner and they still have a commissioner representing them. So that's interesting that was a perspective.
It's just a lot of what I've heard.
Yeah.
No,
I just find it
yeah,
interesting.
it is interesting.
That was why they thought that, that's interesting. You did. That's funny. So it's basically, according to Dennis's letter, it's 3 and 3. And MC is not here. Interesting. Well, does anybody want to speak up on their thoughts on, because I think we all, I'm not, hopefully not speaking out of turn. I think we all agree that the 3-year terms seems like something that everybody likes. And Michelle, do you have anything on that?
I don't mind the terms, the 3-year terms I think is great, but I still think that we have to, I still think that someone from the commission has valuable experience and then should be able to have another maybe 3 years or 2 years, whatever it is, to be mayor. I just feel like if
that wasn't
correct.
part
Yeah,
of it.
that would be my only concern if we limited over the overall. But if it's 3-year terms for the commission and then it resets to be able to run for mayor, then I would agree with that.
I think that's kind of what we all landed on at the last meeting was 3-year terms commissioner, 3-year terms. Am I correct? I thought so.
Yeah.
So Gary, do you feel the same way?
They would.
Okay.
Same, nothing there on the term.
So then really our biggest discussion is going to be the county-wide vote on whether we think that should be put to the commission to do or city-wide vote on our individual commissioners. I don't know if you want to start, Michelle, if you personally, other than even your polling.
I'm always for accountability, and I feel like if you have to be accountable, even, and everybody knows it, that your decision, you can't just protect yourself by protecting, the people, that you're doing the best thing for the entire town, for the entire city, then I'm always for that. So I would actually vote for it.
Yeah, they want to keep accountability. They want to keep that accountability with that commissioner, and they just said we want to stay focused right in our districts.
Well, how do you feel?
I agree with them. Yep.
I would say anytime that you have a small group of people that's 50-50 on something, I think that it's an opportunity to put it to the larger vote. So I would vote in favor of putting it.
I mean, I agree with the accountability. I think it's definitely, especially in a small city our size, I think when you break it down to just those, I definitely believe in the single representation. I believe in us having the different districts. I have absolutely take no issue with that, so that each community has their own representation. Because you are correct, Sunset Beach definitely would kind of be, left out a little bit more than likely, if it weren't for that. So I definitely agree with the districts. I also, though, because our city's so small, my opinion is that for the accountability, it just makes sense because these individual commissioners, yes, they represent Isle of Capri and Isle of Palms and that general area and Paradise and Sunset. However, they still come together and vote on entire city issues. And my opinion is if you are going to vote on a citywide issue, you should be voted in by the entire city. That's my opinion. And that's kind of how so I definitely am for moving it forward. And but that's my opinion. And feel free to pick it apart.
Yeah. I think it's a great recommendation because again, the commission has to approve it and then, the voters have to vote for it. So I feel like it's a recommendation and people don't like it, they can make their voices heard.
Exactly. That's exactly how I feel. And I would agree with you, Jake. When it's 50-50, it's better to move it forward and then let the next level decide on what they want to do. There you are. Oh, no worries. So actually, it's good.
Perfect then.
It is. We're just discussing, we all, and feel free to disagree, we all just kind of agreed initially that we think that the three-year terms as commissioner, three-year terms as mayor, for the term limits, and we all agreed on that. So we moved on now to discussing the county, I keep saying county, the citywide vote, keeping the individual commissioners for their representation, but that the actual vote is citywide. So we just started discussing that. We're about 50-50. And Dennis was ill and he wrote a little letter here on his thoughts. But I think all of us did a little bit of polling in our neighborhoods and our friends. Did you? And what did you come back with?
Everyone that I spoke to, and I did a diversity of people on Sunset Beach, and they said the basic comments were it was hard enough to be involved in figuring out their own commissioner and the mayor candidate, that they would feel that it would not be helpful to know about the other commissioners, and that they might not do justice in voting for the other commissioners and would tend to not vote if they weren't familiar with the candidate. And then the other issue came up in reference to, now having those commissioners having to then spend the money and their time when people's time is already stretched potentially to campaign in the other district. So not one person said, I think it's a great idea. However, I will go with, as I heard coming in, we'll pass it on and let them decide if this is worthy of passing on or not.
And it's funny because we've all had different experiences, and it's, I definitely come down to if the commissioners, yes, they represent the individual communities. However, they vote on citywide issues. So, I think it's important, and I do think it's important for the voters to know what's going on, not because it's such a tiny little city. It's so small, and that was my opinion. And Jake said, if it's 50-50, then we should probably move it forward. And right.
Happen to know how many people actually voted from Sunset, just for an example, last election? Just curious, because one of my points last week or last month, feels like a week, was that it also helps to prevent corruption. And if there is only, say, 400 people, based on the amount of populace we saw in the last 400 people vote, it doesn't take a whole lot for two commissioners to go rally up the majority of 400 people, then you get, you get two commissioners and a mayor that are close, and a lot of things that maybe the greater whole would not agree with could be done.
Well, and that was a big concern of several people I spoke to. And I'm not trying to be naive about it, and you don't like to think that those things happen, but it would be more likely for those types.
It would be less likely because more people would be voting. So they're right.
They tended to think the other way, that the commissioners or people from other parts of the city could get together and support one of the other people running for commissioner in that particular district. I don't want to say stack the cards, but there was a concern about that. I said, well, right, but I'm willing to say let's move on.
I'm in favor of moving it on too. Let's do it.
Definitely. You for moving it on. Okay.
But we're still good on the 333. That's locked in.
I
Just
think that,
okay.
that we're definitely,
So, if I may, the last time we were here, you asked about the number of commissioners and kind of the years that they served, and if we had any kind of data on that. And Ruth did poll all of the commissioners and mayors that have served for the last 32 years. So we have an understanding of kind of how many different folks we have and how long they've served. And I have some information which I'll pass out to you if you're still interested in it, which demonstrates that the majority of commissioners and mayors that have served under the 9-year limit that you're proposing. That you've only had 3 in the last 32 years that have extended that time frame. And so I'll pass that information out to you. And then I also have some proposed language, and I want to drill down on that a little bit with you, because one of the things that you talked about the last time was having all of them be 3-year terms. And I think the thought process is that you would never have an election where you had 3 seats turn at the same time. In order to do that, we're going to need to draft the language such that we extend someone's term a year. And so I have some proposed thoughts on that, so I'm going to distribute that very.
So let me just get a feel of the timeline. So of course the commissioners would have to vote us, and also what kind of a time frame would this, if it all goes well and all the moons align and all planets align, when would this be enacted?
Go to the so let's say you make your recommendations, it goes to the commission, they approve it by ordinance, it goes to the voters in November.
Okay.
And then the voters would vote on that, and it would take effect at the next, I mean, as far as terms, it would be for the next election, and that's spelled out in here as well.
Okay.
Proposed language.
Okay.
like the majority served 4 years.
Actually had the majority of commissioners either serving 2 or 3 years during that time period. So this isn't the list, and we can provide you the actual list that shows each person, but this was just kind of a summary of it that I thought might be more helpful in demonstrating how many folks have served over that time period, how long their term of service was. Now, for the draft language. So the language that's proposed here would be beginning in March of 2023, the district commissioners would be elected for 3-year terms. and that they could serve no more than 3 full 3-year terms as a district commissioner. So that's meaning if they serve a partial term, it would not count. It doesn't have to be consecutive, so it could be over their lifetime. And that's only as district commissioner. And then beginning in March of 2024, the mayor commissioner, well, it'll be elected as described below, and I'll get into that. But they, and what I did there was basically give the mayor a one-time 4-year term. So that way it's spread it out. And you'll see why. If you flip the page, it shows right now that the mayor has a 3-year term and serves until 24. The District 1 and 3 have at a 3-year term would serve 23, and 2 and 4 at a 3-year term would serve until 24. So we would have that turnover again. So if we can amend that time frame, I'm sorry, it was a 3-year term and then two-year terms for the district. Then if we amend that to 3 years starting in 22, you would see the mayor who would be elected in 24 would be up in 27. The District 1 and 3 would be elected in 23, up in 26, and District 2 and 4 would be elected in 24 and up in 27. So we're continuing that 3 commissioners, or 2 commissioners and a mayor, 3 seats that get turned over. But if we extended the mayor one time from 24 to 28 for a 4-year term, then that would have all the terms staggered. So then it would be 26, 27, 28. And then when it came up again, it would be 29, 30, 31. So you would, and it would actually make it so that every 4th year, you would not actually have an election rather than having one every single year.
It saves the city a little bit of money.
Would it would pay those election costs?
Absolutely.
So that's how I've currently written it. It was just a proposal for you all to consider. Also in here, it shows that the commissioners from District 1 and 3 and the commissioners from 2 and 4 are elected at large. And I believe that's hearing you today, that is the direction that you want to go.
I believe so. I think everybody's in agreement that we do that.
But are they both going to be the same? Are they 2 separate issues, or are we making it a combined one issue? As far as how we're going to break it, right now I'm just dealing with what are the changes you want to see in the charter. And then when I present an ordinance to the commission, I'll present the charter language change. And whatever changes they want to go forward to, then I will present an ordinance that will have the actual ballot language. And so I'll be respectful of the one subject rule and the other things that would govern the ballot. But I just want to make sure that you're comfortable and that this language represents what you would like to see done in the charter. Could you clarify again? So the mayor, the way it is now, is up for re-election in 2024. Correct. In order to page this properly, we're proposing that the mayor be extended, and are we, I'm assuming we're able to do that this year, recommending that, that the mayor would be up for re-election in 2027? No, so he would, if we go with the 4-year term in 2024, that mayor will serve 4 years.
So the next,
And then in 2028, it'll be 3 years, 3 years after that, 3 years after that. It's just a one-time 4-year
okay.
to get the terms staggered.
Have any discussion on this?
And then very quickly, I also identified in here just as bullet points some of the, kind of the description of the change that you were identifying, and then the rationale of this board for that change. And so if there's anything else that you want added when I draft the memo, which will come back before you, but when I draft the memo of the proposed change, and then I will identify what that is and why you wanted it. I wanted to make sure that I had covered all the reasons, because this is a significant change. So I want to make sure I captured it. If you have any edits, please let me know. Otherwise,
Second to last on the rationale. Catch that.
No eliminate name.
yeah. Oh, no, that should be eliminate name, then, yeah. Sorry about that. Okay. Then I think if it's all right with you, I'd like to have a motion on this proposed language so that it's clear in the record that you all agree to it. And then I'll put that towards your final memo.
Anybody have any other comments on it before we move it to motion? All right.
My only comment would be, do we need to read the entire language to make the motion?
No, you can just say moving to approve the language as presented by the city attorney.
I'll make the motion to approve the language provided by the city attorney, proposed revisions to Article 3 of the charter.
Second. You'll need to call for public comment.
Oh. Is there any public comment?
5,000. My name is Mike Ratty. I live on the alley Capri at 11950 4th Street East. I would just like to say that I am for term limits, definitely. I think the 3-year terms would be perfectly fine, but I am not at all for citywide voting for individual districts. And the reason for that is I think it's really important for citizens in their own area, in their own district, to vote for their person. Because I think if you try to vote for other people's representatives, it's just diluting those people's ability to pick the person that they want to represent them. So I definitely believe that we should just keep it single member districts. And the only citywide election should be for mayor. The other thing is that if you have citywide for the different districts, you're going to increase the cost of people to run for those offices, because now they've got to appeal to everybody in the city as opposed to just the people in their district. So that's just my opinion.
Is there anyone online?
No online comment.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. I look.
Madam Chair, would you like to go back to 410?
Yes, let's
Okay.
go back to 410.
So just as a recap, this 410 is dealing with the city's ability for municipal borrowing. And I know I've gone through the overview on the changes, and so I will not bore you with that again, but I will turn this over to Dwayne Draper, who, as I previously mentioned, was bond counsel for the city during the last bonding for the new city hall building. So Dwayne, can you hear me?
Yeah, Jennifer, can you hear me?
I can. If you wouldn't mind taking it from here.
I'll do so. Thank you. So this is my name is Dwayne Draper, and I serve as bond counsel to the city of Treasure Island. Most recently on the City Hall transaction. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the unusual limitations that exist in your charter. Yeah, as you're looking at this, some of these limitations are archaic and restrictive, which is not typical of a municipality similar in size and character to Treasure Island, and it leaves to your city commission and management to deal with big challenges with, in essence, one hand tied behind their back. And B, it has a built-in discouragement of borrowing and with optimal financial terms, even when that may be beneficial to the taxpayer and residents to borrow. And I'll get into some details on that in a little bit. There are a number of archaic restrictions in that charter section that really derive from a different era, circa 1978, when the charter was put in place, that can make borrowing harder to accomplish and potentially more expensive, which is counterintuitive from the perspective of a taxpayer who wants the lowest taxes. And this bias against capital borrowing in your charter has the effect of encouraging the city to do what's called as pay-as-you-go capital projects, even if the capital projects have long useful lives, rather than debt financing those capital projects. And the type of capital projects that may come up from time to time that would be appropriate for consideration for debt would include things like City Hall, stormwater improvements, copiers that were subject recently to a proposed financing lease. All would be capital projects because they have various useful lives that are multiple years. With regard to long useful life capital funding, this lien that exists in your charter towards pay-go financing can be fundamentally unfair in that it can overly burden the current generation of taxpayers, so you all, and can let future generation of taxpayers, for example, those who may move here and purchase a property in Treasure Island from New York or other places a few years from now, totally off the hook with regard to capital project financing. And you might ask, well, why don't most cities have debt limitations in their charter? And there are two reasons. One is because the Florida Constitution in the background already limits municipal debt, the ability to do municipal debt, and that is usually good enough to make taxpayers feel comfortable enough. According to the Florida Constitution, if Treasure Island bonds, for example, are payable from property taxes and mature in greater than 12 months, it does already require a voter referendum within the municipality, no matter what your charter says. And the other reason is limitations are good to have. It's just below the charter at the debt management planning level, which we'll talk about underneath the city commission. Some may come into this conversation thinking all debt is bad, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I will agree with you that financing operating deficits like the federal government does is bad debt, or financing 5-year computers with 10-year debt or 15-year debt, that's bad debt. But similar to a 30-year fixed rate mortgage to finance a new home purchase, financing a new sewer plant that has a 30-year useful life with a 30-year level debt service structure in a historically low interest rate environment to be paid from sewer rates spread out over 30 years of use is a wise matching of assets to liabilities. Some disadvantages of pay-as-you-go financing relative to debt financing are as follows. It can postpone the community's desired capital projects and service levels. Current revenues are not likely to be sufficient to pay for significant capital outlays unless you pre-accumulate the amount of money in a reserve account. Also, higher cost of construction, if inflation rises at a rate higher than the cost of borrowing, can be a net loss to the community. And then you have intergenerational inequity, which is what I talked about earlier, where those who benefit in the future from the capital facility, let's call it a park, do not contribute to the cost of the facility, but the current taxpayers pay for all of the park, even though they may not be around to enjoy it during its duration. And those future taxpayers who may enjoy it in the future may pay nothing. Some advantages of debt financing relative to pay as you go on capital projects is the city can enjoy prompt use and benefit of the capital improvements. So you can access the capital improvement sooner. We talked about intergenerational equity. In this case, the cost of capital expenditures gets spread out more equally over all of its users, so current taxpayers and future taxpayers both pay for it. So that's a fairness argument. And then with the positive inflation rate that we're experiencing and the historical low interest rates, repayment costs can be less burdensome than would be if you waited to accumulate the cash before you did the improvement. So one of the things that we think as we look at this section of the charter is that a straight deletion of the borrowing limitations in the charter is a good thing. That does not mean that debt will be unlimited and unmanaged, because you have the constitutional limitation, and a typical city of your size and character would adopt a robust debt management policy at the commission level, which includes debt limitations that aren't structured in 1978 based upon the way it was then, but based upon current rating criteria. And Prag, your financial advisor, the city's financial advisor who's with us today, would be in great position to help provide the professional advice to help, along with GFOA best practices and evolving metrics for investment grade ratings, to put together such a debt management policy that would take into account such things as debt burden, community's ability to pay, interest rates, liquidity, et cetera. And it would take into account that high debt burdens may lower credit ratings. That's to be avoided and raise the cost of future borrowing. So, what's easier? It's easier to change that debt management policy over time as circumstances change than it is to change your charter. Changing the charter is hard. For example, in 1978, sea level rise wasn't a thing. That was 2 causeway bridges ago. Hurricanes weren't strong or as frequent. A computer that you can put in the palm of your hand then fit in a room at City Hall. So we are not advocating removing debt limitations from the city's mosaic, just from the charter, to make it to add flexibility and agility. And flexibility is a good thing. It has value, just like low interest rates have value to the taxpayer. So specifically, going down the ones that we think would be good to extricate from your charter, get rid of the single project debt financing requirement in 4.10 B1. It is very hard to define what a single project is, as many of the projects these days are interrelated in terms of time and scope and commonalities and economies of scale. And allow the representative form of government, the city commission, to deem it beneficial to the taxpayer to finance connected projects and the consolidated financing to save on cost of issuance with economies of scale, if it would benefit a taxpayer, and not have that just be blanket prohibited at the charter level. Get rid of the outstanding debt requirement of limit of 3.5%. That's in 4.10 B1. That's over limiting. It's not based on anything that makes rational sense to us professionals as far as rating agency criteria for over leveraging, et cetera. Again, cover this in the commission approved, thoughtfully developed debt management plan. Similarly, get rid of the total debt service limit of 20% in 4.10 B2 for the same reasons. Again, cover this in the commission approved, thoughtfully developed management plan. Get rid of the lowest net interest cost procurement requirement in 4.10B3, which artificially dictates really procurement inside the charter, where that could be handled again in this debt management policy. Really, in this area of finance, you're dealing with apples versus oranges, and to have a requirement like that that really assumes wrongly that you're comparing apples to apples can chill market participation. It could prioritize interest rate to the exclusion of other key financial terms that may be important to the city, like call flexibility, ability to refinance savings in a lower interest rate environment, reserve requirements, rate covenants, etc. And this could be, to the detriment of the taxpayer. Don't allow the minority on the commission to veto debt. In most jurisdictions, a majority can authorize debt, which is 3 out of 5. Here under 4.10B, it takes 4 of 5 commissioners, meaning the minority can dictate debt management. In most cities of your size, a majority rules when authorizing debt. And then lastly, and this relates to a different article, 3.09, authorize debt by resolution rather than ordinance like most municipalities. In 2 weeks in between a first reading of an ordinance and a second reading of an ordinance, we have seen recently how rates can shoot up a lot. And that's not good for the taxpayer. So the higher inflation and interest rates that we're all experiencing illustrate that time is money. And so that's just an unnecessary exposing yourself to interest rate risk. So these are some of the things that we think should come out of the charter and be dealt with under the city commission and a thoughtful debt management plan developed by your financial advisor. These are our comments to you all as the city's bond counsel, and we are happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I know part of the professional team that's here with us today is Prague Financial Advisors. They are the city's municipal advisor, and they are really in an excellent position to give you some perspective on getting the best financial deal with banks and underwriting firms, showing well to the rating agencies, developing a debt management plan. All are things that are best from the taxpayer's perspective without artificial restrictions in the charter that can be prohibitive or create inflexibility. And with that, I will see if there are any questions for me, and or hand it over to back to Jennifer to see how she.
Do you all have any questions for Dwayne?
Hi, Dwayne. Would you please give an example that occurred on Treasure Island, potentially in the past that you're aware of, that would cover, because I just want an example to understand this better, so that would cover B3 and 4. So if you're asking us to eliminate those two, how do they come into play?
Sure.
And Dwayne,
Yeah,
sure.
I'm gonna let Mary Ann Edmonds talk about that, because I think that's came up in the procurement of your lender in the last City Hall.
Right. So I'm Mary Ann Edmonds. I'm with Public Resources Advisory Group. One quick sort of explanation. We are hired to be your financial and municipal advisor. Should understand we're not selling you anything. We don't sell products. What we do is provide advice, and we're governed by SEC regulation. Our hands are pretty tightly tied in terms of how we're supposed to interact with you and what we're supposed to do. Provision 3 is the one that talks about this lowest net interest cost. So I want to tell you what that is. Lowest net interest cost is the way before computers, before readily accessible computing power. It's the way we would compare one lender's proposal to lend you money against another lender's proposal to lend you money. This calculation was something that you could do using arithmetic. It was a long arithmetic problem, but you could do it. And what it didn't take into account at all was that a dollar in the future has less value than a dollar today. What we in the finance business call the time value of money. You know, if someone says to you, I'll give you a dollar today, or I'll give it to you in 5 years, which would you prefer? You want it today, because in 5 years it might have 50 cents purchasing power. So when we did the last bond issue, we were required under the charter to evaluate the proposals based on the lowest net interest cost. And that is an inexact, not accurate, not truly the best way to evaluate what is the best financial transaction for you. The way we evaluate these things now, among other things, the mathematical calculation we do is a yield calculation where, you know, when you go to get your mortgage or buy a car, where you're looking at APR. What's the annual percentage interest rate, as opposed to how many dollars you're going to pay. So that's one thing. The second thing is the fourth item says, in preparation of any bond, the commission shall give particular consideration to all factors that will achieve the highest possible rating from a national rating agency and secure the lowest net interest cost for the bond. We've already addressed net interest cost. Highest national bond rating. Usually we are striving for the highest rating we can get. But when you are structuring debt and borrowing money, there's always covenants that go with that. And sometimes there may be a trade-off between a more restrictive covenant that will get you a higher credit rating and a lower restrictive covenant that will provide you more flexibility in the future, flexibility that you might think has value. So having this dictated in the charter is the kind of thing that it didn't come up in our last deal because we weren't going for a rating in that case. But it is the kind of thing that can come up. And this provision, I'd say, it would be hard for me to judge as a professional in this field whether what the trade-off is between lowest net interest cost and highest rating in many situations. Did that go too far or not far enough?
Well, the one thing that I would like for you to explain, and that was very thorough, is when you said the last bond that you went for. So what was the project at Treasure Island that would cover B3? What were you trying to get a bond for? What project was it?
That was the City Hall.
Okay, and so while you're trying to procure the funds and using this formula that's in the charter, it was more restrictive to you? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, it's not, and it's more restrictive, and it's what this formula does is it takes all the dollars you pay over time and it divides it by how many years each dollar, how long it is that each dollar, from the time you issue the debt till each dollar is paid back. So if you paid back $10 over 10 years, you'd be adding up for that denominator 1 year for the first dollar plus 2 for the second dollar that's paid in the 2 years. So that makes your denominator, the number you're dividing, by 3. And then you'd add 3 years for the next dollar that you're paying back. And so it's really quite a nonsensical calculation. Whereas what you'd want to do instead is you'd want to say, if I'm paying back $1 a year for 10 years, what's that what's the interest rate? What's the actual yield I'm paying? That's the calculation.
Thank you. Very quickly, I may have one other thing that if I can ask Mary Ann to kind of hop in and correct me if I'm wrong, but that may also help in demonstrating that. I think that when we went out, Mary Ann, please correct me if I'm not saying this right, when we went out for the bids with regard to City Hall, we had to specifically identify all of the features we wanted in the loan because
Yes.
the criteria we could evaluate it on was the lowest net interest cost.
That's
So
correct.
whereas other cities might have been able to go out and say, okay, yes, we're interested in interest rate, but what's it going to cost us if we want to be able to pay it off early? You know, and kind of monetize what that option would be and then make that decision based on the best deal for the city. We just had to put all the terms in and say, give us the best interest rate you can get us for this term because this is the only thing we can evaluate.
That's absolutely correct. You had no flexibility to say, okay, can we tell us, you had no ability to assess the value of a lower interest rate, say, versus the ability to prepay your debt early, or a lower interest rate versus a higher reserve fund. You had none of that flexibility when you did this solicitation. And the problem is that things move so fast now. You know, conditions change so fast that we might put out, if we have to specify every term and condition, from the time we do that and to the time we get bids in, the world might have changed enough that we've left money on the table.
Are there any other questions for Dwayne or?
Yes, I would just say everything seems very simple and black and white, and it doesn't seem to have any negatives to change the wording or to lose the three parts, reword the first part. But is there anything that we're missing? I guess what are we not hearing? Is there any downside to changing this, or is it all upside?
From a financial advisor's perspective, I think the flexibility for you is upside. It doesn't mean you're going to behave any differently, because we would propose to you that you adopt debt management policies that constrain what you're going to do in light of your financial situation. So I don't see flexibility as a bad thing. I think flexibility is a good thing. So that's from our perspective.
It's also.
Yeah, and from a legal perspective, I would also just say that it's upside. And the reason I would say that is that there may be 18, 20, 22 municipalities in Pinellas County, and very few, if any, have limitations like this in their charter. So you all may be dealing across the peninsula, across Pinellas County, with a storm or a hurricane, and you're at a disadvantage under this charter trying to deal with solving those issues proactively or reactively by having restrictions on your flexibility in the charter that don't rationally tie to anything that is going on today in 2022 and tie back to a different era. By removing these and instead leaning on the Florida Constitution and its limitations and a thoughtfully developed debt management policy that has agility to it, you're going to put yourself in position to proactively and reactively deal with big issues, some of which can be anticipated and some of which cannot over time. And that's going to put, at the end of the day, that's good for the taxpayer to have choices and abilities to toggle back between debt finance and pay-go finance, and also being able to react to changing market conditions and needs. So I too don't see any upside or downside to putting this charter more on par with what the vast majority of municipalities have in their charter, which are not restrictions like this. So I think it just puts you on an even playing field, really.
So I guess let me ask it another way. Why hasn't it not been done? I heard the year 1978 for some reason in my head. Maybe that number's not true, but 44 years. Why has it not been amended since?
You know, I was wondering.
I'm not sure I'm aware that y'all have focused on this before. I certainly haven't been before the review commission in the past, and it may just very well have been. It hasn't been something that's been focused on before, but it's certainly an unusual provisions that are sitting in that section.
And the only other thing I would add to that is I'm not sure how many bonds the city has gone out and done, but since we did one very recently with City Hall, it's very fresh. And we really recognized some of the limitations that this put on the procurement itself. And Amy may have more insight on that as well.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with our legal representation. Jen Cowan, since she has a background in public legal, it's a fancy word, but public legal background, trained in public, boy, the name escapes me.
You're talking about public finance?
Well, no, even just, no.
You're talking about
terms of the city.
Yeah.
We've had a number of, I just can't think of it, city attorneys that may not have had the extensive public experience background. So for this charter review, she has proactively involved staff. So you're getting a professional's opinion, because in charter reviews prior, it was just you all talking, and you didn't have your professionals giving comment, or from your department giving comment on how to make it better. So that might have something to do with it. But because of the extensive background that we have on board now, she's able to really reach in and operationally kind of can see this isn't, part of part to what's going on in the public realm of comparing yourself to other municipalities and other local governments.
I'm trying to sway you either way. So I was on the last charter review committee, and I'll tell you, this section came up. I think we just went right past it.
Yeah.
So,
would you introduce yourself for those of us
yes,
that don't?
Tyler Payne, I'm the name.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
You look different on TV.
Yeah.
You look thinner on TV.
Oh. You need to lose a few pounds. Yeah, I think we just glossed right over it because, like Amy said, we didn't have that professional. Jennifer was brand new when we were going through it last time, so she didn't have time to sink her. So it's just not something that's ever been considered.
Yeah, I think I'd been here 2 months when we started charter review last time, and it was a smaller charter review board, and it was really I will say that charter review's approach was a little different than this charter review's approach has been. I think that charter review is really looking at it and going, okay, do we see anything that's like flagrantly objectionable in the language almost itself? And this has kind of been working for the city. And do we have anything? And Amy's absolutely right. We didn't involve staff. Now staff is very involved. As a matter of fact, when we have staff meetings, we even say, okay, charter review's coming up. It's covering these sections. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Yeah. And I think being here longer, I've seen more of it. So it may trigger me to even ask the staff. But I also feel like, you all, even the last issue, you all have come in and kind of addressed issues where you're not really looking specifically at language and does the languaging need to be changed for this? But you're like, what about this concept? That hasn't been contemplated in here. So I think it was just a different approach of the people who have served, and probably honestly reminiscent of the time. You think about it, 5 years ago, people were looking at things differently than they are now. So
Having the professional opinions too, that's huge because they have no ulterior motive.
and they're doing this for multiple cities
Right.
across Florida, not just even in Pinellas County. And so, you know, they can give you that kind of insight of this is what others are doing and this is how you can be competitive.
So I wanted to offer maybe some Treasure Island examples of how inflexibility could be negative. So for example, if we had a great project that came up, right now the language is you have a very restrictive per project limitation. And right now, if you do that math, that's roughly $12 million. Let's just say we have an opportunity for all new public works, new master lift station, master pump station, which is critical that we have, otherwise you can't live on the island. And we have a grant opportunity, let's say that's $15 million, and we have a grant opportunity that's even just, $5 million, because the project is $15 million, you can't borrow, even though it's not all the amount that you're going to borrow. That's just kind of just a real life scenario. And it's real life because construction is expensive. So $12 million isn't hard to come up with. Our new city hall, we purchased that building and then we have the renovation. The renovation is running about $4.1 million. The purchase price was $6.375, I believe, but we're approaching about $11 million there. And that's with the renovation, that's less expensive than a new construction. You have to have city facilities to operate out of. And it's not just buildings like this, but critical infrastructure like the master lift station, the bridge, just the sewer pipe. We have a sewer pipe that goes, it's a subaqueous, it goes under the water, that our sewer collection system collects all the sewer here, and then it pipes it to the city of St. Petersburg for treatment, and it goes under the water. An anchor or something, or, we could have an accident that pipe gets broken. That would be an emergency situation of a very expensive repair. So just also think of the utility aspect in terms of infrastructure maintenance and just accidents that could happen. And that in like an event of a storm that could happen as well. I know we already brought that up. So kind of limiting it by project just doesn't make any sense to me, just because it doesn't, you could be turning away a really good opportunity for grants or even a public-private partnership where you're paying for a section of it, or maybe you're funding the whole thing, but then you're getting resources from other sectors and you're limiting yourself to an opportunity like that. Another idea is there might be a capital investment that you can make as a city to dramatically reduce operating costs, which would, and this is like in a utility realm, which would reduce your utility fee. For example, we're looking at feasibility perhaps of changing where the treatment of our sewer is being done, considering maybe Pinellas County. That would involve a significant pipe being built, but it would have significant long-term operating and rate reduction. But if you're limited by borrowing to even put in the capital investment to get all those gains in the long run, it doesn't really make sense. It will hurt you. And then the last but not least would be something that would come up from you all as residents, property owners, if you want to do something that's particular, a seawall program, raising of the street to meet sea level rising, undergrounding, utilities, stormwater that you want and you're willing to pay for it in your own neighborhood. That would be an assessment program that the city would borrow, and then you pay back the city, but you are paying back the city. But we might not be able to do that because we're limited by the borrowing. So it might even be something that's coming from you all that we can't facilitate for you. So those are just some 4 examples to kind of bring it home on how the limited language can really hurt. Have any questions?
Just seems proactive to me. To me, it seems like a no-brainer. I mean, it's very outdated.
Yeah.
As they stated it. I mean, especially if we get hit by a storm. Especially if we get hit by a storm, that could be a disaster.
And just to kind of go back to that net interest cost, I mean, I think that was actually like an actual financial term. Like we think of it when you just read it, not coming back with a financial background, you just think it's like the net interest cost, like it's a common sense thing, but it's actually a calculated methodology. And so in today's world, you put a bid out and you basically say, give me your best deal. And it's going to come back with things that we might not even be familiar with because the financial market is changing so much and they have new tools and new ways of coming up with debt. So you really can't keep up with it fast enough to have any kind of limitation in any kind of charter like this. It would be basically that we want to put the proposal out that's basically like, give us your best deal. And then it has all the different factors that you can consider that would make sense for the type of borrowing that you're doing and what you're buying with it.
It's no different than any of us would do if we were building a project at our house. You need to be able to be open to taking bids and get the best deal, and it makes sense. And to me, it makes every bit of sense.
Well, the proposed language I handed out, that's before you. Right now, it deals with 410, and you'll see the changes that have been done. I'm going to walk through all of those just very quickly. I know the ones that Dwayne has already covered, I'll skim right through, but you'll see in section A, it talks about the city manager shall submit an annual budget and budget message in a manner and form specified by ordinance, not specified in our ordinance, and I'm not sure that there's any real reason for it to be specified by ordinance. It doesn't change the fact that the city manager is still going to submit the annual budget message. The next item, anticipated net surplus for ensuring fiscal years of each utility owned and operated by the city and the proposed method of its disposition with subsidiary budgets for each utility. Detailed income expenditure information is to be attached as an appendix to the budget. That languaging was just really funky and strange, and we thought it was a lot easier to just say every fiscal year for all the utilities that are owned or operated by the city, the income and expenditure information will be included in the budget. Same thing here when you have the total future, it said commitments in one fiscal year shall not exceed the estimated income. The way that we actually look at it is that the future expenditures in any one fiscal year shall not exceed the total revenue and fund balance, because you very well may be saving for a particular expenditure. So it wouldn't just be based on the revenue, but also on the fund balance that had accumulated for that. The municipal borrowing, as you said, striking the last sentence in B. You already have protections within the Constitution with regard to borrowing power when you're pledging ad valorem that requires, if it's more than 12 months, you go to referendum. And in here, it just goes to allowing the minority to control the whether or not you take on the debt by having a 4/5 majority as opposed to just a simple majority that Dwayne was speaking about earlier. We've gone over 1, 2, 3, and 4 pretty extensively as far as why those would be changed. And then in 3.09, right now, it talks about when we're authorizing borrowing of any money, that has to be done by ordinance. I think that Dwayne mentioned it. Shifting that to resolution allows for the commission to adopt a resolution at one meeting as opposed to having an ordinance that require 2 readings. So you're going to be a minimum of at least probably 2 weeks out. So when you're asking someone who's, particularly financial institutions that have put in a bid to then hold it open that long, they're not often inclined to do that. So that can be problematic for us as well. And then in 3.10 with emergency ordinances, again, this is just striking the for authorized borrowing money, making it consistent with the prior change because you would be looking at the resolution. So with the language before you, have any comments or changes? We can hold it for a meeting, but if you're good, I'll take a motion to move this forward.
I do. So first of all, the 4/5 majority, I'm just trying to think long-term. And you said some of this is covered in the borrowing ability based on the state constitution.
So in the Constitution, it deals with whether or not a borrowing would go to referendum.
And what is that limit?
So if you're pledging as what you're promising to pay back with, if you're promising to pay back with ad valorem revenue, your property taxes, and the debt is for more than 12 months, then it has to go to referendum. There's no choice. It doesn't matter what we put in our charter on this.
So whether we're floating a bond or are you saying true borrowing,
Any borrow.
that would be getting a bond that has to be,
It could, I mean, and Dwayne, please feel free to hop in here if I'm misstated, but it could be any borrowing. It could be anything where you are pledging ad valorem to pay that debt for, and that is more than 12 months.
So do we always pay it through the ad
Yeah,
valorem?
that's right. It's a lot of semantic.
That's right. So a lot of the bonds, or I should say a lot of bonds, a lot of the borrowing that we'll do will pledge a specific income source. So for instance, if you were doing an improvement on a utility, you may pledge those utility revenues to pay for that improvement that you're doing, and that's not pledging property taxes, but pledging that income from the utility. So it wouldn't trigger the referendum requirement.
So what other things wouldn't trigger the referendum?
A borrowing under 12 months where you're pledging,
And what would be borrowed at?
borrow something for under 12 months where we pledge ad valorem revenues, but maybe,
But I'm talking about not ad valorem.
non-ad valorem. If you're using non-ad valorem, then you're not triggering that referendum.
Right, so what have we borrowed that's been?
City Hall.
That's been triggering a referendum or
No,
not?
that has not.
Okay. The purchase of our city hall, we did a borrowing that was not against property taxes, but
And what did we borrow? Yeah, like the
special revenue sources. We have a number of 120, 130 different line items of revenue. So if it's pledged to another revenue source other than property taxes, it will not charge it or won't trigger a referendum. We have two small borrowings for utility for sewer, so that's pledging sewer rates. And then we have we're just last year of a 4-year borrowing that's a lease purchase, but it falls under that umbrella in the penny for Pinellas for our fire truck. So it's pledging those sales, it's like paying for it out of penny for Pinellas, which is that 1% sales tax.
Okay, and in all of those cases, the commission voted for fifth to move forward on those expenditures.
Correct.
Loan agreement
I'm sorry?
for the
Yeah,
borrowing.
and Amy, if I could,
Go ahead, jump in.
yeah, and Amy, if I could just jump in too, I think the focal point here is that in the case of City Hall and many of the other borrowings, there's a 4/5 requirement for City Commission approval, and that's pretty high bar. It's kind of like an extraordinary majority, I suppose. And so you could have a popular project that needs to be done in the community. Majority of the commission's in favor, 3 votes, but not 4 votes. So you have a 2-person minority who could be against the project, and under your charter, they could veto your ability to borrow for that capital project and postpone its need, whether you're trying to solve a hurricane problem or proactively, get into a city hall that can work in the future. And the only point there is that that's atypical of communities your size across the state of Florida. Typically, a minority can't, defeat the approval of a most of what they do at the commission, including debt. And so we're just suggesting that, if you had a 3/5 majority approval, that would put you in line with other communities trying to solve problems, as opposed to having a higher mountain to climb in order to get something done. The city hall was unanimous, but so it's not a great example of one that failed because of this requirement, but you could foresee one in the future where a minority could control your ability to issue debt, and that's unusual.
And then the other, this is Marian Edmonds. The other thing I'd point out, I pulled up the financial statements. I didn't pull up anything too recent. 2019 was the last thing in my file. But of your revenues, say in 2019, from just governmental activities, not the enterprise funds, your revenues were $15 million. 6 of that was from property tax. So you have a lot of other revenue from other sources that you can use to pay debt that would not be subject to referendum.
Just so that the enterprise funds are our utility funds. So they're
That's-
kind of like businesses, they are self-supporting by their own fee, by the own revenue that they generate. Governmental funds are more tax-driven or fee-driven. That's not providing a direct service like that. So police, fire, it's all of our general government type of activity. Answer your question. Thank you.
I mean, I'll speak up. I mean, thank you guys though for really explaining it and making it pretty simple to understand. And just touching on what was just spoke about, I mean, again, in my opinion, there's a majority should absolutely be able to vote on that. The minority should not be able to squash a project when the majority votes for it. That seems very, very, very outdated. If it was ever dated.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we have to put ourselves as a city in a position of being at an advantage, not a disadvantage, especially if we're competing with other municipalities when we're potentially already at a disadvantage because of where we're located. If, Lord forbid, there's a storm. So, and maybe this wasn't addressed. I thought that was a great question. Like, why hadn't we addressed this earlier? Well, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, you know, we may not have needed capital because buildings were newer and the city in itself was newer. So now that we've had to replace old and tired buildings, we're finding that maybe the charter is old and tired and we need to upgrade it and do what's relevant to not just today, but for the future of the city.
I would much rather be proactive than reactive.
Make a motion? All right, I'll make a motion to approve the revisions put forth by the attorney. Section 410, section 3.09, section 3.10.
I'll second it.
You should call for public comment. Yes, public comment. I always forget that.
Duh. Just do it.
Yeah.
I like that public comment. Now we can do it. It's the worst part. I always forget. I'm letting you know.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
If I disagree with one of the items, do I just say no to them all? We really grouped all of these together. And the only one I don't agree on is the 4/5. I think when we're going to spend money like that, and it's not from ad valorem taxes, my personal opinion is there should be a higher threshold for the city borrowing money. And to get 4 out of the 5 to vote yes, and it sounds like they've been, that the commissioners have been good about that in the past with necessary items, and it makes them think twice about, is this something we really should do? And if we're borrowing a lot of money, I just think we should have a higher threshold. So I agree with everyone, but that 4/5 changing that.
So you have to vote on the motion that's been presented on the floor. You can,
We have to group all of these
You can move to amend that motion, and you can separate it out, so you can move to amend the motion and change the motion to approve the language that's presented from the city attorney without striking the 4/5 majority required for borrowing.
Okay, so I'm going to amend it that we accept 3.09 with the changes, 3.10 with the changes, and section 4.10, the only item to be kept as is the 4/3 majority vote, 4/5, I'm sorry.
Okay. Do we have a second for the amendment? There's no second on the amendment. The amendment dies. So you would be voting on the motion that stood. And you're voting. Aye. Okay. With that, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Dwayne. Thank you, Molly. I think we can move
Thank y'all.
on.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Move on to our next item. And again, I have one more item that I'd like to kind of take out of order before we continue on 4 and 5, and that is 4.06. And the only reason why I'm asking to take that out of order is we do have staff that's here. I'm going to present to you the revised language, and then we can talk about it a little bit. And if you have any questions, staff is also. That's the last thing I had to talk about. So more Vanna moments. The language that's before you right now, you'll see at first I placed the current language and then the revised language. The revised language is just striking section 4.06 personnel system from the charter entirely. The city.
I said that. I read it 3 times. I'm like, what's different?
Yeah. Sorry about that. The language that currently exists contemplates that there would be established a career service system, something that hasn't really been at the city since the 80s. What was done is this language was in the charter. The city adopted an ordinance and basically defined the career service system to be the personnel system that exists today. But all of the personnel system, as far as how it's dealt with, and then subsequently the policies, are generally brought before the commission, and that's something that would be handled by the commission. And having this language exist in the current charter, references a system that really doesn't exist anymore, and it's not an issue that generally voters are or taxpayers are as concerned with. The personnel system is more of like an internal management that would happen between the commission and the city manager. So it would be staff's recommendation to just strike this entire.
How do you put that before a vote, though? Do you explain why, or does someone have to spend money marketing the reason why before the election?
So with all of these, there will be the actual language change, and then there will be a brief description for every charter amendment that will describe what that amendment does. Now, that may not provide. It will provide some of the why. It may not provide all of it. I believe that they can rely on the minutes from this meeting as to why the board has taken the action or the recommendations that were presented to the board that they followed. There may be an informational sheet the city produces that just literally describes the difference between what was and what is. But the city won't advocate for any particular change. It will just be informational. That answered the.
I like the informational sheet idea because I think most people vote no most of the time because they don't understand the verbiage.
So I asked.
Yeah.
So we have the HR director that's standing by, and she's more than happy to come in here and answer any questions you may have. If here she is, right on cue.
Good afternoon. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them, but it's exactly just to reiterate what Jennifer was saying, the reason to suggest removing it was strictly just from an efficiency standpoint. So,
Good here. Just go ahead and make a motion then. Okay, make a motion that we delete this current language of section 4.06 in the personnel system.
I'll second the motion.
Any public comment?
Sorry. I was.
Sure. Come on, Michael, you don't have anything? Is there anything online?
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Thank you. And with that, we can walk through the other sections that we haven't already discussed in Article 4 and 5. With regard to 4.01, there are no recommended changes by staff. Again, with regard to 4.02, 4.03, and 4.04 and 5, there are no changes that were recommended by staff. However, should you have any changes, please feel free to voice them. Same thing with 4.07, 4.08, and 4.09. There are no changes that were recommended by staff. I don't want to move too fast and give you an opportunity to read through each section. Feel free to just let me know. When we go into, that brings us to Article 5. And in Article 5, I will tell you that there will be proposed changes to 5.05, but until we had the discussion on whether or not there was going to be at large for, each district commissioner was going to be voted on at large, or whether or not they were going to remain in their district. I wasn't sure which changes to propose for 5.05. So now that we've done that, I will bring that back to you at the next charter review meeting. But with regard to 5.01 and 5.02 and 5.03, there are no recommended changes. And I'm just double checking 5.04. I don't think there are any changes for that one either. No, it would just be 5.05. And I can give you a preview even of what 5.05 the recommendation is going to be. I think yes, this is the one that dealt with redistricting. And so if you're voting at large, redistricting isn't going to be necessary. You can just designate your districts, and those are your districts, because you're not going to be held to the same constitutional, one vote issue as everybody's voting for. unless you all have any changes, add both of those sections. The next time we'll be reviewing 6 and 7, and we'll do that together. At this time, I can tell you I don't anticipate bringing staff changes to those sections, but I promise it. And then other than that, I did want to touch back real quickly before you do public comment and adjourn on Article 3. As we, in answering your question, I said, we're going to look at this with regard to single subject and with regard to the changes for the term limits and the at-large. And I will look at it that way. But is it your preference, the law would provide, to break those up, have it be term limits and at-large, so we don't lose both?
I think
I
it
agree.
has to be separate.
I think that's,
I think it's going to end up likely being that way, but I just wanted to make sure that.
Yeah.
So at the end, what we'll also do is, like I told you before, will be a memo that comprises all this. I'll have all of the changes. I may even have, I probably won't have anticipated out language at that time, but at least I'll have the rationale from this board, so that memo will be there. Again, that will be another reason to have that memo as a public informational piece on why it's recommended. So I'm not just giving what the language was, but your rationale.
Right, is there any public comment online?
Nothing online.
Did we close the issue on the causeway? It was up for discussion with the legal description, and we were running out of time last time. So we'll talk about it this time with the first time around when we were talking about the legal description and something with the bridge close to Park Street.
Right, that's part of the causeway, but not in the
Of legal description.
correct. Right, for the city, but it's identified, I think, as Treasure Island Causeway. We own that property, but it's outside those limits.
Right, so does that mean the commission to vote on, and I'm probably not gonna say this right, but does that give the commission the power to be able to disposition any section of Causeway Boulevard that is outside of the legal description? Because in the last charter amendment you had given us, that it talked about something with treasure, it just identified it as Treasure Island Causeway, and we were thinking, wait a minute, that's a long stretch of road, and then,
Yeah, and we're out for the park, out the
it doesn't have to come to vote the citizen.
I don't believe, I'll have to go back. I know I said that last time, but it
That's
honestly
okay. I
just slipped
don't
my
want-
mind. I
I
was
just
looking at
don't
the,
wanna forget
no,
about
let me
that.
come back to that.
Okay,
And I also realized that one of the charter amendments that came up last time that was voted down is with regard to section 6.02. So you know how I said I didn't have any proposed amendments. I was already wrong. I do have one. It will come next time. It was the same one that was last time. And I can tell you, it just literally is bringing the charter in conformance with state law.
and which one of those referendums was it, so we can look at it?
It's 6.02 in the charter. And it was,
Referendum, hopefully the figure out which one.
it was the proposed, it was number 3 of the charter amendment, and it proposed to change in 6.02. Right now it calls for petition signed by at least 25%, and that was to be changed to 10% in accordance with state law. And I'll bring that next time. But
And can you be stricter than state law and something like that, or is that not? Like you said, state law is 10%, but do we have to be in conformity with state law? Just asking you.
Yeah, I believe that is, that's correct, that you have to come into compliance with this. And I will verify that, but I believe that that was true, is that that's why it was proposed.
Okay. That, if that wasn't accepted, then isn't that really a moot point? If it wasn't, what, like if the citizens didn't vote to do
If you
that.
didn't have to do, well, and I think what it is right now, even if you didn't vote to do it, because it's required in state law,
Right.
we would have to honor it.
Right.
So it was just a cleanup to make us in conformance with that.
Right.
Yeah,
It doesn't make a difference on us having to comply.
no,
Okay, got it. And when I say
I know what you meant.
okay.
Right.
Yes.
I'll ask for public comment one more time since it was on that. All right, I move to adjourn.
A second.
Just so you